The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I am joined by my awesome co-hosts this week.
Nate Heininger.
Ooh,
go, Nate,
same
go,
time,
Nate,
same
go, Nate.
time.
I normally go first.
You do go first.
You know what? I haven't been on the show for a couple weeks. I accept your apology. Hold on.
Nate accepts our apology for refusing to allow him on the podcast for the last several weeks. Go ahead, Nate.
Nate Heininger.
And Laura Nash.
Nate, it's so good to hear your voice. And This week we are talking about a game called Wide Ocean Big Jacket, developed by Turnfollow and published by Tender Claws, both of which are new names to me.
Great game name. It took me a while to understand it, but we are usually making fun of game names, and for whatever reason, I really liked this one.
I like it too. Like, it's a really good title. I don't know what makes a title good necessarily, but like, it seems like it's more of like an album title than a video game title to me.
Yeah. Shockingly, despite every other title that sounds like something else, because they're getting it mixed up, like Wide Ocean Big Jacket, I remembered exactly to the point that I thought there was no way that was the correct title. Because I was like, it's too close to Short Skirt Long Jacket.
Yeah.
But no, this one's sticky.
Shane kept calling it My Ocean Jacket in the chat.
Oh, yeah, that was Shane.
Different thing.
Yeah, if it was like most of the games that we kind of like make fun of, it'd be like Jacket, Wide Ocean, or something like that.
Wide Ocean, the big jacketing.
Or it'd be like a pleasant camping trip, Wide Ocean Big Jacket.
Yeah, right. Feelings, growing up, Wide Jacket.
Yes. And also I will thank friend of the show, John Brainlove, who suggested this game to us. He was covering... This is a game that we are releasing this episode a day late because it's a brand new game. There is an embargo. And so I have to delay the episode from Monday to Tuesday, which is no big deal. But also, we don't cover a lot of games in advance of their release very often because sometimes it's hard to gauge the length of a game or gauge whether it's going to be the kind of thing that we want to do on this show in advance of release. But John was covering it for a different outlet and kind of gave us the tip off that this was definitely going to be capital M, my capital S, HIT on this show here. So, and John was right. So thanks to John for suggesting the game.
Yeah, we were definitely, as we were playing, and we'll note this later, there are a lot of times we're like, yep, this is a short game, catnip right here, undistilled, pure undistilled, for a game that's, 60 to 90 minutes, quote, like watching a good movie with friends or curling up to read a book. I mean, you've already got us.
Yeah. Good,
we're done.
Good way to pitch the length. I think more games need to pitch based on their length as a pro, and this game definitely does that well here.
Well, games have for a long time promoted their time, but it's been the inverse, and it's kind of one of the impetus of the creations of this show, where games would be like, it's 150 hours, like
capital C content.
The content.
Yes. So this game is definitely in our wheelhouse in terms of length, but also in terms of storytelling and even in terms of the kind of subject matter it covers. So this is a primarily
teens.
Yes, this is a primarily narrative-driven experience. I think the closest things that I can compare it to would be, I was reminded a little bit of sort of the visual sort of film-like storytelling style of some of the games from Brendan Chung and Blendo games. I was reminded a little bit of a like 30 Flights of Loving, but through a kind of a Wes Anderson lens. So it's got it's a bit more twee, not to use that as a pejorative here, but it is just sort of the sort of sweet and lightly funny, character-driven kind of narrative, told in a way that is primarily about finding engaging ways to present the dialogue, rather than about creating game systems or anything like that.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little more on like Fantastic Mr. Fox Wes Anderson, because it's not going to like stuff a bunch of quirk down your throat. It's a pretty light touch. I really liked
it's a light quirk.
There's
definitely
there's
quirk.
quirk.
There's quirk.
There's definitely quirk. there's a ton of personality throughout this game. It is not a heavy drama by any means. It's not going to not make you think.
Yeah.
Double negative. Definitely great for podcasts.
I was thinking, if we're going to continue our game stew here, I was thinking Florence kind of gave me sort of a slice of life. Also in its like color palette, kind of similar to Florence. And then this one's a little bit of a stretch, but there was I had some similar like tone or feeling a little bit to Gone Home. Not the like mystery side of it, but some of the subject matter and just the feeling I had while playing this. Also with Gone Home, where I always thought something bigger and like scary was going to happen. And instead this is like, oh, this is like incredibly grounded.
I think I get what you mean in that it's definitely a story about sort of the themes of coming of age and teen theme.
Yeah, to me, the biggest thing was if there's plenty of games and media about like 8 and 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds, and there's a ton of stuff about like 14, 15, 16, 17. But it's not that common to see 12, 13, like a little bit precocious on some things and not on others. And I think that really just like pervades the feel of this because it's a camping trip. It's about this aunt and uncle who are bringing their niece and her boyfriend on a camping trip, and you do all the camping trip things. And a story emerges because it's a narrative game. But the idea that they're focusing on the kids being 12 and 13 makes a huge difference to this game. And I think that's what makes it feel very different from the like teen drama stuff and the like little kid Goonies stuff. Like this feels in a nice like middle ground.
And it kind of targets two age ranges that I think you don't see a whole lot in games. They don't explicitly say the age of the aunt and uncle,
Brad and Chloe. I love Brad the names in this game, and I feel like we should just get this out of the way that like Brad is the uncle by blood of Mord, the main character. I'd say main character, but that's probably a bit inaccurate because it's pretty ensemble. But Mord is sort of the focus of the story in some ways. And
she's the alpha wolf, as she proclaims.
Oh, yes. And then Brad's wife is Chloe, and Mord's boyfriend is Ben. And first of all, like, Mord and Chloe are two fantastic names that I have never heard before, and I love them both. Those are really great characters. Yeah. All four of them.
They were great names. And they're all good characters, too. And that's the setup. Brad and Chloe have brought Mord and Ben with them on a camping trip. Seems like camping is something that is very near and dear to Brad and Chloe, and it's the first time for Mord and Ben that they've gone camping. And what would you peg the ages of Brad and Chloe? I was thinking like 33.
Yeah,
right in that like
I was thinking like mid 30s. They're clearly like right on that verge where we'll talk about some of the themes later, but they're kind of on that verge where it's like if they wanted to, this is an age where they could be having kids. They're clearly the sort of responsible adults, but they're also the like cool childless uncle and aunt who are taking the young niece and her boyfriend out for fun times kind of thing.
Which, to be real, like no parent is bringing a 12-year-old and their boyfriend on a camping trip. Like this is definitely an aunt and uncle cool move.
Yeah, right. Totally is. I had this uncle, by the way. Like for me, this was like probably my Uncle Ty was like that. You always, I think, if you have a sufficiently large parental family, you always have the cool uncle.
That was the uncle with the pool, right?
Right. Oh, no. Right. Ty was the younger brother of the uncle with the pool. Okay. That was my Uncle Hugh, who was he was a good dude, but he was not the cool uncle because he was not the young uncle. Youngness and coolness have a direct proportional relationship, right? And it's always like the younger brother of your parent that is the cool one, I think.
Yep.
And so that's definitely the relationship here. This is like, I don't think we find out much about Mord's mother, but Mord's mother's younger brother is Brad, I think, right?
Yeah, their ages seem like it would be plausible that they could have had these kids, but they would have had to have kids at like 2021 right out of college. So like they seem too young, just a little too young to have these kids as their actual kids. Like that's what age they seem to be.
Yeah, and I don't, to the original point, I don't know of a lot of games that sort of address that time in someone's life. Like, it's usually like you're 25, you're out of college, you don't know what you're doing, or it's like we're going straight to like middle-age crisis sort of thing. This is that like coming up on the midlife crisis stage of a life.
I mean, this felt to me very much like my behavior at my family Christmas party, which is when I go talk to all the kids in high school and college about their classes because I'm actually interested and I ignore their parents.
No. Like, you're the cool aunt now.
I am the cool childless aunt.
Yeah, it's funny that this made me think a lot about that stage of my life, in both positions, because like I've never quite been that like Mr. Cool uncle or whatever, but part of that is because I've during that period of my life I was mostly not living in the town where most of my family members were, but I very much recognize there's a sort of a feeling you get from Brad and Chloanne where they're like they don't know what 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds are like, or what to do with them. And they're constantly surprised about things like, wow, I didn't know they'd be this smart, that kind of.
And they clearly didn't get rules from mom.
No, yeah. They just don't know how to relate to kids this age. And I've had that feeling too, where like, you have a young relative who sort of like phases out of your life for a while you're doing your own thing. And then suddenly they come back into your life and they are no longer a little kid. They are this person. And it can be really weird and also kind of cool. And I think that's kind of how what we're seeing with Brad and Chloanne interacting with Mord.
And maybe so. I have had like none of this in my life. I have now a niece and a nephew, and they are 4 months and 8 months. So that's the first I just became.
And you're not taking the 4-month-old and her boyfriend out on camping trips?
We did. It went horribly. And both of my parents were the youngest or within like a year or two of the youngest of their family. So all of my aunts and uncles have always been much older than my parents. And I definitely had like a cool uncle, but he was more cool because he's just like very smart and very calm and very interesting, but not like the cool guy, So I don't know. Like I didn't really ever have any of that, which is fine. I don't know what it is, but
yeah, for us, the cool uncle was like the one that at some point came by and dropped off a crate of like Talking Heads vinyl and was like, "I'm done with these. You can check these out now."
Oh wow! So like an actual cool.
Yeah. So I will say one thing that's interesting though, because all of my uncles and aunts were way older. I do have some cousins that were like 10 or 15 years older than me, and I had one cousin who gave me his PlayStation.
Ooh.
And Tony Hawk when I was like, I don't know, whenever that game was out.
That's not a cool uncle. That's a rad uncle.
It was my cousin, but he mowed. Yeah, I think that probably fills that space because he mowed. He had like a little lawn mowing company when he was like 20 and had landed some like crazy commercial jobs. So he was like loaded for being like 20, and he bought like a whole bunch of stuff and gave me his old stuff. And that was really cool. So I guess that's about as close as I would have to a cool uncle. Though like 4 years later, he tried to take the PlayStation back and he became way less cool.
Yeah, see, all I want to do is stay the cool aunt. Like, I know to be honest, like my niece and nephew love Justin. And so he's going to be the cool uncle. I just feel like I suffer in comparison.
Aw.
Yeah. Oh,
it's true, but
well, I mean, back to so we've obviously that kind of we definitely I think relate. So we
relate hard to the older couple in the game. No surprise.
Yeah.
Yes and no though. That's where I felt so a little bit of like not spoilers, but for me, I didn't feel a lot of personal connection to this game. I think a lot of the tone and feelings of this kind of missed me, but I do think it is very well done for those personal feelings. So for people who do connect to this, I could see it being very, very a very emotional experience because it is handled really well. I just like don't have many of the life experiences that they really dig in on this game.
I think it's like if you connect with either the Brad and Chloanne side of things, the sort of older but not super old, people trying to relate to their young relatives, or the sort of Mord and Ben side of things, which is the sort of interesting, nerdy kids trying to kind of navigate early puberty and early relationships, and the idea of sex. Is that a thing that I'm interested in? How am I supposed to be thinking about it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, where they're definitely walking that bridge where like is at 12 is the person you're dating the person who you like the most, who you hang out with the most? It's like there's a narrow line between friendship and relationship is definitely what they're walking here.
Yeah,
and it's lovely.
Very directly, right? Because Mord is like, well, we were very good friends for 3 years, and I realized that like I wanted to date someone, so why not him? It's like, well, that's actually pretty logical thinking.
I think that's a totally that's a 13-year-old or 12-year-old like first relationship thing, and it feels very their relationship felt very, very realistic to me, except that like I was really rooting for them, but like, man, like I don't know, maybe this is just me talking, but like I was like, there are storm clouds on the horizon here, no matter how perfect and wonderful both of these children are, like, because all of these relationships end in little 13-year-old tears.
Yeah. Well, so when thinking about like things that you connect to, Ben, I think was the closest that I kind of related to, but he's like so quiet and weird that it was like almost like too far. But
this being a narrative game, my favorite thing about Ben was the amount of times he spoke in sentences where every first letter of every word was capitalized. It is just such a formal shy kid way to talk, and I was so happy.
We should talk about the way that this game does actual like gameplay and dialogue, because I think it's pretty interesting. They do a lot with a little here.
Yeah, I think we have really jumped into the narrative feelings before we've actually really set
which
up,
is what probably matters most about this thing, so I'm okay with it. Totally. But yeah, somebody better at it than me, go ahead and explain the dialogue system and everything.
So the way the dialogue system works is it starts out really nicely. You're going on a camping trip, you're in a car, and you learn that when you tilt the camera at different people, their name will appear in all caps above them, and you hit a button, and then you're talking with them from the perspective of whoever you're playing. So you might look, it's that you're not playing as if you are Mord. You're basically looking at Mord, and then Mord will start a conversation. So
yeah, you actually go back and forth. Sometimes you are playing as a character or seeing the world through their eyes, and then sometimes you are just like a centerpiece camera that is rotating around the scene, and you're selecting who you want to see, like what they're going to say in that scene.
Right. And that inconsistency sounds like it could be really confusing, but it's not. Really, you're just kind of, sometimes you're controlling a person, you're walking around, you're doing stuff, you're initiating conversations. But really, you're looking at an object or a person, and that becomes a conversation topic. So you might walk over to a picnic table and talk about a picnic table. You might walk over to Chloanne, and now you're having a conversation with Chloanne. But it's this kind of blend of initiating dialogue with exploration, where it does feel like you'll unpack the whole story, pretty linearly, but you do get to choose kind of where you're talking next, what you're talking about. It feels a little bit more like, I had a lot of flashback to some of the games you played in IF Comp, where you can look around an area and really start trees anywhere, but it's a much more visual approach.
Yeah, it's very film-like in terms of how it feels edited in a film-like kind of way.
Yeah.
It's divided into scenes, and those scenes might have several different sort of conversations that happen in them, but lots of jump cuts from one scene to the next, not in a 30 Flights of Loving like kind of editing style, but in a very film-like editing style. And also, we didn't talk about the visuals yet, really, but it has a low poly look to it that reminds me a lot of, it's a popular aesthetic these days. I think you could compare the aesthetic here to really popular games like Untitled Goose Game or Donut County, or others that are using this sort of like flat color unshaded 3D model, low poly aesthetic, where it's more about sort of suggesting the appearance of things, and things can be very stylized. So like the characters have, very simplistic faces with cartoonish elements to them. Like Brad has this sort of like Pinocchio nose that I think is very cute. Or not Brad, Ben, sorry. And so it's visually, I thought, like I found it very appealing, and I think it does a great job of picking a color palette that kind of I don't know quite what to say about it other than that it had a nice vibe to me. It felt like kind of like a camping trip at the perfect part of summer with the perfect weather, and just the vibe worked.
Yeah, like kind of a brighter pastel.
Oh, and we should also talk about the way the dialogue is delivered, which is, I thought, a little bit unique. When you do sort of essentially like click on somebody to start a dialogue sequence with them, it switches from that fully 3D environment to a black screen with a white background and like hand illustrated looking portraits of each character. And you're only seeing one line of dialogue at a time on screen. So you're kind of clicking through dialogue and seeing usually like one sentence at a time. I really, really like this way of delivering dialogue, where it restricts how much text it's putting on screen at once. Sometimes when a game just overloads you with dialogue, like I saw a tweet the other day where somebody was, some sort of unpopular gaming opinion, and I'm sorry, I can't remember whose tweet it was. I think I retweeted it, but they were talking about how they felt like JRPG dialogue had gotten worse over the years as the character count limits in dialogue boxes had, evaporated with more modern systems. And that like being able to, having the restriction on character count and how much text you could actually show in a single text box on screen meant that the dialogue flowed more quickly and more, maybe naturally. I totally agree with that. And I think, if you, in a dialogue driven game, I certainly have played games where they give you basically a page of scrollable text to read, but this is not that. This feels light and dialogue-y. I don't know how else to describe that, because it gives you such short scraps of text to read at a time.
Yeah. Well, people, this is where the game, I think, really felt the best. Is it really felt like a conversation, and also this is where. We said the game is like 60 to 90 minutes. There's really not a lot that extends that other than, I guess, your own pace of reading, right? Because everything is really on a tee for you. There's nothing you're figuring out. There's no like alternate paths, no side quest, nothing. It's really just you're following as the game sets up for you. There are a couple times where they let you decide like if you're going to engage with this person instead of this person, but I'm assuming it's a very low consequence and just kind of you get to engage with whatever character you like more. Yeah. And I really like this dialogue system. It's like super easy to read, white text on black background. I feel like a lot of games like this would have wanted to put like little text bubbles or something in the 3D world, and I think that would have been annoying. So they handled it really well. It also allows them, as Raygan said, or one of you said earlier in the game, they do a lot of, or in the episode, they do a lot of fun stuff with text to set up like how the person is talking, because it is just white text on black background. So things in parentheses indicates that they're like trying to whisper to each other, all caps yelling, random capitalization, just a lot of funny things that they can do to kind of include how the character's feeling.
Yeah, it felt a lot more like the way the unspoken language we figured out in text without actually being text dialogue. Like that's what it felt more like to me. Like it felt like the combo between playwriting where you see a line each time and, texting where the capitalization and the grammar of it tell you how someone would say it in real life.
Yeah, totally. I feel like texting has changed the way that video game dialogue works. I mean, I'm old enough to have been playing video games before I was texting, and I do feel like just the way that people write messages to each other online and on phones is has presented some new techniques that this game is definitely drawing on. I think it's really interesting. I also think like the way that they do this dialogue, where the dialogue happens in a sort of a different mode or screen than in the sort of exploring the world, walking around and looking at things mode, is interesting because it allows them to. First of all, it means that their expressions, people's facial expressions and everything can happen in your head, whereas like they stick to this extremely simple and basically not animated style with the 3D models. So the 3D models do have expressive appearances, but mostly they don't change while you're looking at them. Like you might look at a character and they are slouching in a chair and bouncing their leg, and then it cuts to dialogue or some other scene, and then you cut back to them maybe later, and they're in a different configuration, right? They've got a different expression on their face. They're doing something different with their body, but it's not something where we're seeing a lot of like people's emotive stuff happening in real time. But the fact that the dialogue happens in this sort of black screen and we're sort of envisioning the characters means that, kind of like reading a good book, you are putting together your portrait of what that character's mannerisms are in your head.
Yeah, they use it for comedy too, because anytime you go from like a black screen to a scene, and the characters have all switched, sometimes they're doing something funny or they've really changed their posture that makes you laugh. They also, I think, a couple times, I do think they try to use the way the camera switches around to give you sort of a sense of maybe what the kids are feeling or like the tone of the game. So the best example, this is really early in the game. I think it might even be the first scene. It starts out the kids are in the car and you're the camera that's in the middle. So you're swapping back and forth looking at the two kids. And then so you've been trained at the beginning of the game, you just press left or right and you're just going to go back on even eye level with these kids sitting in the car. And then after a couple times of doing that, you press over and the camera swoops to the right and up, and the aunt and uncle are looking down into the car, and they just look like these really big people compared to these kids. And I do think that is supposed to emulate that sort of feeling of like you're a little kid and your aunt and uncle and just adults are a lot bigger than you, and especially when you're seated, so you're looking up at them and they're looking down on you. I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think that the camera motion is really fun. I also love it when they capture a still moment. So there's a part where everyone's eating hot dogs around the fire. I don't consider that a spoiler because it's camping. Nope. You eat hot dogs. And you can look around at everybody, where Brad's having beer or, Ben's curled up in a chair. And then you whirl around and you see Mord with just lounging with 2 hot dogs. And it's like one of the funniest moments. Like, it reminds me of the theater game where everyone freezes in place. Like, you have 3 images to do a story at tableaus. Because it was like if you were taking a frozen shot of the campfire and everyone was at their like emblematic self around the campfire. It would have been like Brad chill with a beer, Ben kind of curled up in his chair, and Mord lounging with 2 hot dogs.
Totally. I really liked Mord as a character. She's just really this game does a really good job of being tender and sweet while also being funny. And everything Mord does, it gave me that feeling. Like I was
she's baby dirtbag of the year. Like,
oh yeah. I wonder how much we can talk about this without getting into, we can talk about the themes, but I don't want to talk about specifics of particular conversations without giving a spoiler break. Is there anything we feel like we can talk about in terms of just examples of moments that we thought are good or things about the themes of the game that we can do before we talk spoilers?
Oh, we can talk about the 2 short game bait pieces, namely Mean Teens and Birdwatching.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yes.
So, yeah, the Mean Teens. I was very pleased when we had not only encountered some Mean Teens, but then the game put the large all caps text Mean Teens on screen. And I was like, okay, let's talk to these Mean Teens.
They were so mean.
And it was also at this point where I thought maybe this game was going to become a spooky teens game, which we have covered many times. Now, I won't tell you whether it does or does not become a spooky teens game, but that was another sort of short game classic trope that I thought we were stumbling into. And then, yes, of course, bird watching.
The mean teens bit, though, like it's so perfect that like there's this feeling that like I don't think back on very often, but like the feeling of like you're absolutely like Mord and Ben are absolutely absorbed in trying to figure out, okay, we have a relationship now. What does that mean? And they're like sneaking away to go to the beach, and then they're encountering mean teens who are, oh, are you guys dating? Oh, or where are you guys going? Kind of thing. Like that intrusion onto that, like, I'm having a hard enough time as it is, just trying to figure out how to be a fucking human being. Like, that was like, chef's kiss. Like,
you're making me feel bad and look bad, and I don't know how to react, and you're saying
and I need to be cool in front of my, my significant other, and I, these teens are giving me a hard time and making me look like a loser. Oof.
Oh, I feel for you. I feel for you guys so hard.
Sorry, Ben. Sorry, Mord. But, mean teens are a force of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And the bird watching stuff, like I didn't expect there to be bird watching in this game, or I would have, put on the bird watching signal and called friend of the show Mark Bramhill in.
Who is on the record as being like, guys, I'm not that into birds. I just work for bird place.
Nope. It's important that we have an expert on every bird related episode, and really, this game, because it snuck up on us that it's bird related. Really lucked out, because this really should have been reserved for Bird Week 3 or whatever we call those episodes, because there's some choice bird watching in this game.
Absolutely. And yes, I am aware, Mark, we don't solely identify you as the bird guy. It's just a funny thing that we like now.
Yeah, well, he was our Apple guy, but he's really slotted perfectly into this bird role that every podcast. So that's the thing. Every podcast has a bird guy. So we had to find our own.
Yeah.
You always need a bird consultant.
We don't make the rules.
Yeah. Apple makes the rules.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I really had a lovely, sweet time with this game. I sat down and played it in one sitting on Switch. We didn't mention that before, but this is a game that's out on Steam, Itch, and Nintendo Switch on the eShop. I guess there's something to talk about there too, which is just that, like, I think it's really neat to see these types of games, these sort of totally narrative focused micro indie games, not just coming to the Nintendo Switch, but actually launching on Switch. I think that's really neat.
In a matter of, 2 years, Nintendo has gone from the perception of the only thing that's good on Nintendo games and the only thing that's really worth having a Nintendo platform is for the first-party Nintendo games, right? You're going to buy your Wii U or your Wii or whatever, and you're just going to play every version of the Mario world. And then maybe there'll be like a port of something that's good, but you should just play it on PlayStation or whatever. That was, and I've owned every Nintendo console since they really existed, and I've been fine with that world because I love the Mario first party games. But in a short time, that entire like perception is they've changed. Now I think of the Switch as like my go-to place for these indie games, which is a credit to Nintendo for opening their platform so well. And I think a boon to the industry because everyone has a Switch and these types of games are perfect on the Switch, arguably better than sitting in front of your computer and playing them. So it's really helped the industry. It's awesome that Nintendo has reinvented itself in such a short time. I can't like imagining a game like this coming out on the Wii, right? That never would have happened. And I just think it's so awesome. And I think it's awesome for Nintendo and for the indie game developer world.
Yeah. And these types of games, do come out on other platforms like PlayStation, for example. And obviously like, Steam and so on. That's good. Like, I'm glad this game's come out there. And, it's not something that like, oh, it's not legit unless it's on console or what have you. But I think if a developer is deciding whether to port a game like this to any console, or maybe even if they're deciding between console and a mobile version or something, it seems like Nintendo Switch has become the de facto choice because it's a marketplace where they can find an audience. It addresses both people who prefer to play on a TV and have a more immersive experience like that, or people who want a pull it out of their bag on the subway kind of experience. It spans a lot of potential play styles and types of players. And I'm really glad to see that happening. I hope that the Nintendo Switch, there's a lot of talk about how the Nintendo Switch eShop is getting cluttered, which I think is potentially a problem. The shop isn't the best. It loads slowly when you boot it up, and their search isn't great. But it's fine, and I would rather see these kinds of things coming out regularly on the Switch rather than have them I would rather see one of these and 50 shovelware anime puzzle games than to not get this on the Switch, basically.
Yeah, well, and just think about again what a transition that is from. I wouldn't even really bother going to the eShop on the other Nintendo platforms because it was I bought Mario Kart and I got the new Mario, and I'm not really going to go and get anything from the eShop. Now the problem is, there's too much stuff on there that I have a hard time filtering through and identifying what I want to buy. I'm like, that's a problem, sure, but it's a problem on the better side of things than what Nintendo was before.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, more of this, please. I was really glad that we got to play this, and I was excited to play it on Switch because I just really enjoyed that experience. And so, longtime listeners to this show know that we haven't actually done it in the last couple, but we usually end the show or end the pre-spoiler portion of the show with what's making us happy this week. So, Laura, what's making you happy this week?
So this last weekend, right after I recorded the Ring Fit episode, I took myself to a big conference center in New York, and I pet about 400 dogs, and it was great.
Oh, my God.
There was an event called Meet the Breeds. American Kennel Club does it. It used to be paired with the Westminster Dog Show weekend, but they've broken it out separately. And they promised on the till 200 breeds of dogs and some cats in there. So I was a little how many cats are there going to be? I don't care about the cats. And they also make you fill out a souvenir when you, a little survey, not souvenir, when you ask, which is how did you hear about this? And what are you here to see? And it was do you have a pet? It was I don't have a dog. And it was I'm here for the dogs. I'm here for the cats. I'm here for the events. And I was well, clearly I'm here for the dogs. But I went on day 2. So the dogs are a little tired because they've been pet for so many days. But oh my God, it's literally you go from booth, a picture any convention you've ever been to, and every booth is a middle school science fair where but it's people who really like mastiffs have put up the art you might see in a really big breeder's home. If you don't want drool on it, don't let the mastiff in. I don't get these jokes. But then you see this dog that is the size of that's coming up to your chest, and you see a tiny 3-year-old bundling up and reaching up to pet the dog. And I was clearly I've made the right choice.
Stay calm and pet mastiffs.
Pet the dogs, yeah. And it's there are events like this apparently in other places. This is just a very big version of it. And 4 people bailed. I had 4 different people who were going to come to this event with me, and all 4 of them bailed. So I was is it sad to go to a pet the dog show by yourself? And it turns out absolutely not, because the thing is, all the breeders want to talk to you about how good their dog is. And I would have missed that had I been with someone else.
Honestly, I think it's almost never the wrong choice to go to an event like that by yourself. Sometimes these things are better with friends. Lots of things are better with friends. But if your choice is between staying home by yourself or going out to see 200 dogs by yourself.
200 breeds, but every booth had 5 dogs in it.
Right.
I kept saying 200 dogs. There were so many dogs there.
Going to pet literally hundreds of dogs, that is a good choice regardless.
When you're worn out because you've pet so many dogs.
Yeah.
That's a
and
good
regardless.
time.
that's a deeply personal experience too. So it's probably best on your own.
Yeah.
Going to pet hundreds of dogs. Yeah, I think there's definitely a weird that like stigma against doing things by yourself. But whatever, going to restaurants by yourself, great. Go to a movie by yourself. It doesn't matter. If you want to go do it, go do it.
Yeah, and then I also got to just flood the short game Snapchat with just dog after dog after dog.
That was good dog content. Thank you.
It was great dog content. I didn't know you were going to that thing, and then all day I was just like, Laura's around a lot of dogs right now.
Yeah, I didn't give any explanation. I just started sending it to you guys.
Laura's new New York life took a turn I didn't expect.
Yeah.
Hey, if that was it would have been exhausting but fantastic. So yes, going to not dog shows, but the pet the dog shows. Highly recommend.
That is really awesome. I didn't know that was a thing that existed, and now I'm going to be on the lookout for it. One of the things that's making me happy this week is you guys know that I'm a big fan of The Witcher, which I got into via the games. I played The Witcher 2. I think it was way back, like I finished Skyrim and was like, I need more of something like that. And at the time, people were like, oh yeah, Witcher 2 is pretty good. And it was on sale on Steam, and I got into that. And then I was very excited to play The Witcher 3, and I played that like every day for a year. And then there'd been kind of a drought of Witcher in my life. And then here recently, the Witcher television show came out. I had at some point in between, I don't even really know when, tried the books, but the first Witcher book, getting into the Witcher books is a little confusing because the saga begins with 2 collections of short stories and then continues into a trilogy of actual novels. And the show was a lot better than I had thought it would be. Like, Henry Cavill is great. Most of the other actors are pretty good. The story was at least decently told once you kind of wrapped your head around the way they were doing their out-of-sequence storytelling thing, because they're basing the entire first season on 2 collections of short stories. And 2 of the characters, Yennefer and Ciri, barely appear in the short stories until like the very end. So like Geralt's story over the course of the season is like 70 years, whereas like Ciri's story over the course of the first season is like 2 weeks. So weird, timey-wimey stuff going on in the storytelling. Mostly works. But anyway, the thing that's really making me happy is that having watched that, I decided I would take another try at the Witcher novels, although this time I'm doing audiobooks, which has, I think, been a very good choice because it helps propel them forward. The first 2 books are weirdly paced because they're short story collections, but I still very much recommend checking them out if you like any of the other Witcher stuff, or maybe even if you don't, if you just like fantasy. The world of The Witcher, something that you don't really get from the games so much, is very, very much influenced by just very traditional fantasy in the fairy tale realm rather than the sort of Tolkien realm, although that's very much there too. But like lots of callbacks to things like one of the short stories is basically a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but like, what if it was fucked up and realistic Beauty and the Beast, right? That's kind of what Sapkowski was going for early on, and then later he kind of shifted towards this sort of more epic fantasy, world building and so on. So a lot of the early stories kind of feel a little Monster of the Week, but in a good way, where you're kind of like I enjoyed the character more in these books than I thought I would. Prepare yourself, if you do the audiobooks, for the fact that these audiobooks were recorded with a very different performance than either the games or the show. So the person reading the audiobooks gives Geralt a kind of, I guess, some kind of vaguely Scottish accent. It took a little getting used to. And also, book Geralt is enormously more chatty than film or game Geralt. He just does a ton of talking, like a lot. So the characterization is a little different, but I still really recommend them. And I'm now into the 3rd book, which is the beginning of what the book series calls the saga. Basically, the first 2 books are just a collection of short stories setting things up, and then the 3 novels following that, starting with Blood of Elves, is a more traditionally told, chapterized novels covering a consistent story. Because by that point, all of the main characters like Ciri and Yennefer have been introduced, and I'm very excited about it. I'm enjoying it a lot. So if you've enjoyed any of the other Witcher stuff, don't get scared off by the fact that the novels are arranged weirdly, start with a bunch of short stories, etc. Just look up the Witcher novels reading order on Google like I did and do that. And it's a fun time. I've been having fun with it. Nate, what's been making you happy this week?
Yeah, I got a couple things to go through real quick. One, I got a book called The Elements of Pizza from it's a pizza cookbook written by a man named Ken Forkish, who had a bread baking book called Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast, which I think is a relatively well-regarded bread baking book. And he, after writing that, it had some pizza recipes in there. He got like really into making pizza. So we put out a dedicated pizza book, and it has changed my life. I'm ordering flour from Italy. I've been making my own sauce. I've made a handful of pizzas over the last couple of weeks, and it's been a lot of fun. They've been fantastic, which was very surprising to me because I made the first one. Made the dough, made the sauce, didn't make the cheese, but I made like a classic margarita pizza, and I was like, well, this is probably going to be fine. It's the first one I've ever made. It was really, really good, and it really had me basically, I've been making a lot of pizza over the last couple of weeks, all because of this book. It's very lovingly written and very detailed, so if I've never baked anything in my life. I'd never made dough before. I've been interested in making pizza for a while, so I've done a couple of things like whereas buying like Whole
You have a
Foods
pizza oven, right?
Yeah, I have a pizza oven, but that's more like it's like a acts as a toaster oven, but has a slot that is more like pizza. So we'll definitely use it for frozen pizzas and whatnot, and like reheating things, but also use it like. We don't have like actually even a toaster. That's where we make like toast and stuff. So it does a lot of different things for us. But I actually wouldn't use it to make a pizza like this because it doesn't get as hot as you would want. See, now I've got all this pizza making knowledge. But I've made a couple different styles. We had people over for D&D last week, and I made pizza for everyone. It's been really good, and it's been really, really tasty. And I've been really enjoying it. So if you're interested in making your own pizza, definitely recommend this book. It's like $20. And he has all of these different styles, all these different doughs that will work depending on what schedule you have, like when you want to eat pizza, which is challenging because I always want to eat pizza, but you have to plan it a little bit when you're going to make your own. So anyway, I've been doing that a lot, and I've been really enjoying it. If you follow me on like Twitter or Instagram or whatever, you've probably seen some of these pizzas that I've made. You've really seen the ones that have come out that look good. Still not great at making a perfect round pizza, so some of them have looked. Yeah, there you go. But it's been a lot of fun. And then the other thing, really quick, I think on the Katana Zero episode, I said that I thought the soundtrack was fine, that it was good for the game. Since then, it's on Spotify. I've listened to that soundtrack like 100 times.
Wow.
It's become my go-to like work soundtrack. I listen to it at work all the time. I was listening to it while making pizza. And it's just it's way better than I originally gave it credit for. I didn't think it was bad to begin with, but I thought it was more just like cool. It's like EDM or whatever. It fits this like technical or like techno vibe of this game, but it actually is way more dense and interesting. So I've been really, really enjoying that soundtrack. So if you listen to that episode and weren't convinced to go and check it out on its own, I think you should. I've been really, really enjoying it.
Awesome. Well, that's really great. So we're about to hit our spoiler break. There's not a whole lot to talk about post spoiler break here, but the game Wide Ocean Big Jacket included a couple of conversations that we thought were particularly interesting, but would be very spoilery to go into depth about. So we're going to have a brief spoiler break here to talk about those. So if you're hopping off here, thank you for listening to The Short Game. We can be found on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find a contact form. That's a great way to let us know what games you're playing or what you think about the show. Suggest things there. That's great too. Of course, you can also find us on patreon.com/theshortgame, where every one of our beloved patrons gets instant access to our Discord. Discord is where we chat about the games we're playing. This is where the conversations that happen on this show start. And we would love to have you join us there. And you can support at $1 a month or more and get instant access to that Discord. And we'd love to see you there. That's also, incidentally, where John, who suggested this game to us, suggested it. So thank you again to John. You can find our show on Twitter at _shortgame. And you can find me on Twitter at RayganK. That's RayGanK. Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter at NateSTO.
And here it is, your spoiler break. So there are two main conversations that happen in the game that I think are where the game kind of hits its stride and has the sort of most to say. And I guess the first is when Chloanne and Mord are sort of hanging out around the fire. And I guess Brad and Ben have either gone to sleep or are off doing something. And Mord asks Chloanne about sex. I guess I was sort of expecting this conversation or something akin to it because I'd been kind of clued into the fact that this game has, for example, kissing in it. But these are 13-year-olds. I wasn't quite sure where they were going to go with whether there was going to be any conversation with the adults about sex or anything like that. I was kind of surprised to see this conversation, but how did it strike you guys?
To me, I think that it was handled very well in the way that a TV sitcom that wasn't worried about the fallout from this conversation would handle it in a good way. So it felt like we were slightly primed from it because the mean kids were yelling about it, and she'd kind of been exposed to like sex seemed like it was around camping, and they're sleeping in the same place, but it seemed like we're only at the part where they were like barely kissing. Yeah. So it seemed like a thing that was like permeating the world around the kids, but the kids were not part of it. So it seemed like obvious that it was going to come up. I didn't expect it to come up this directly. And I think Chloanne handled it very well. She says basically at some point they're miscommunicating and she's like, we're different people and our minds work differently. And you need to be comfortable talking about sex before you can do it. And I was like, cool, that is the advice you would want the cool aunt to give, and the cool aunt's not going to get in trouble with mom because she did neither endorsed nor said do not have sex.
Yeah.
Although she did say she had sex at 15, so the girl's like, cool, 15, thanks.
Yeah, definitely the permission structure had been set up from that conversation that she could have sex at 15, which, no, I will not render my opinion on that, but I think that was definitely a takeaway from that conversation for that 13-year-old.
Oh, yeah, that 13-year-old was like, okay, 15's a good goal.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep, exactly. I was... The only thing that and you kind of already touched on this, Laura, but I was surprised it was so direct. It's like this, they're going to have this conversation and it's like the first or second thing Mord says or asks Chloanne about.
I love the way she phrased it too. She basically says is sex cool?
Yeah.
But is it cool while you're having it? Does it feel cool?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also appreciated how Chloanne handled it. It feels like this could be set up to be almost like preachy or now this game is going to render a judgment on this sort of conversation or environment. And it's more like, no, there is no such thing as a correct answer in this moment. So let's stick with that, which I thought was really well handled and interesting and was not exactly the direction I was expecting it to go.
Yeah. I thought it was a really lovely scene. certainly not the first thing I've seen show like the talk, essentially, right? But like this was a version of the talk that I was pretty happy with how things went down. I cared about these characters by the time this conversation happened, both of them, and I was invested in how this talk was going to go down, and I still thought it was funny and sweet. While also being like not the worst example of how one of these things could go. So, good.
And it seemed, I really liked that she didn't go to Brad, who she's actually related to.
Yeah.
Because that would be weird. Like, she went to Brad's wife. And I think that's an interesting, like, the thing I admired about this game, and the end when you're doing this, there's a part where there's a stick ceremony and you get to like pass the stick and say, what you liked about the trip basically to each person. And I felt like the whole time this game was going on, like you're having very different conversations with very different people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes games like this are so much about the mood that the people don't sound different. Like the adults sound one way and the kids sound one way. This one, all four of them had their own thing going on. And I appreciated specifically that Mord talked to Chloanne about this. It seemed like the right choice.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's more realistic. Do you think a 13-year-old girl would actually ask like a dude about it? No. In his 30s? No.
Absolutely not. That's gross.
Yeah.
It made sense.
I didn't take a lot of screenshots during that conversation, but I did really feel for Chloanne when she did say to Mord, "Please, not on this trip, for Christ's sake, please."
Yeah.
Like, goddamn, yes. Oh, the terror of dealing with young relatives, or young people in general. And then the other conversation that I thought was really like kind of got at the themes. Okay, there's maybe two other scenes, because the scene where Mord and Ben go out to look at the beach, when night has fallen and the uncle and aunt have gone to bed, and the titular big jacket comes out and they go and look at the wide ocean, right? And that scene was really sweet. I don't know, like there wasn't a lot of dialogue in it, which I thought was good. It was mostly just about Mord and her boyfriend Ben sneaking off to go and look at stars and looking forward at their lives a little bit. And I thought it was sweet.
I liked the hole digging line from Ben where he says something to the effect of like, my high school counselor says do small activities to make uncomfortable moments more comfortable, or something like that. So
use an activity as a bridge. And I was like, that sounds like a very high school counselor kind of thing.
Yeah, so he's digging a hole because he's obviously super uncomfortable with what's happening, which I thought was great.
Yeah, very, very sweet. I thought that was great. It's like, would you like to sit by the hole with me now? And then the sort of what I thought was the only really heavy conversation in the game was after all of this has occurred. I guess the next morning, Brad and Chloanne go for a walk, and they're talking about basically revisiting a topic that clearly has come up for them many times before, which is whether or not they're planning to have kids. And Chloanne is 100% against. And Brad seems like he may have had that conversation in the past, thought he didn't want to have kids, and maybe something about hanging out with these kids makes him want to revisit that.
Yeah, it really struck me as, because that's how he kind of enters into the conversation. He's like, these kids are cool, and I wasn't expecting them to be this cool, and I'm enjoying being around these kids. And so you can tell that he's sort of thinking about it more and decides to bring up the conversation, which he is met with direct rebuttal from Chloanne.
Yeah, Chloanne which shuts I thought was him also down, handled, which is like good and fair, but also like that's these are the kind of dramatic conversations that people have in long-term relationships.
Yeah, and I thought she handled it, or I thought her point was really, really awesome too, and just really
talked about how she it took her forever to figure out how she was. Who she was and how she wanted to be happy, and like she wasn't gonna throw that away because she knew what she wanted, and like we talked about this.
We've talked about this, and I think as the childless representation, or childless representation, I mean, sure, that was a weird Freudian slip. I think that it's a conversation that you got to keep having. But like, I have had acquaintances, none of my close friends, this is not a subtweet of anybody, but I've had acquaintances who one side said, cool, no kids, totally, and just kind of assumed the other person would like have a biological clock tick in and want a kid later, and so they just delayed the conversation. So I was very happy it didn't go that route. Or Brad was like, I kind of always expected if we hung around kids. I was like, I didn't want to hate Brad. I was really worried I would have to end this hating Brad. Because I think if you've had that conversation, it's good to check in again. Just to be like, we're both like, everyone has what ifs, but it seemed like
it's good for a check-in every now and then to say like, oh, did these annoying teens, did they awaken anything in you? No? Okay, we're good. But also,
but you got to be okay with respecting the opinion.
Right.
You can't force it on. Yeah. If you've made a hard decision one way and you want to change it, you have to be okay with the answer being no. And I think it was handled very well. It's a tough thing, and he needed a little space, and he, basically she was like, we'll take him camping again. Like, we can still be around, like, we can still do stuff with your relatives. Like, we can still be parents light, but no, we talked about this. Yeah. Calm down, Brad.
Yeah, I liked that scene a lot, though. Like, it was the kind of conversation that, I guess I don't see that conversation play out in media very often. So
it
unlike
was wistful,
a lot of the others.
But it wasn't mean, and nobody was right, and it was, it was a negotiation, but it was a gentle one.
Yeah.
So
I think the thing you see represented in media most is the couple who felt that way and now they don't. They have both come to the decision to have kids, or one of them is still a little unsure, but they've decided to go along with it. You don't often see the like, no, I know I am very firm in my understanding that I don't want kids, and here's why. And we talked about it. You don't see that direct of a response. At least I can't think of anything, especially not in games that confronts that directly. But also, this game does a good job of, like, everything is handled with a relatively light touch. This sounds pretty intense, but it's like 4 minutes of this game.
They're also having that conversation while, walking around bird watching. There are still jokes in that scene.
Yeah, it's all very light, and it's really only a few minutes, right? And that's all of these things we're talking about. The sex conversation, the beach, and this is like 10 minutes of this hour-long game.
It does sort of trip through it.
And it ends with them holding hands and walking around afterwards.
Yeah.
So it doesn't end with with the dialogue. It ends with a gesture, which I really love.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that, actually, now that you mention it. The sort of final moment of that scene where, after they've had this talk, they hold each other's hands, and you do that. There are various points in this game where you're sort of piloting the characters around, and it does some pretty funny stuff with the way that you're walking around as both Mord and Ben, or as both Chloanne and Brad, and one of them kind of follows the other in a very awkward video gamey kind of follow, but also kind of works in the scenes. And that was, I think, the first time it had anybody sort of holding hands like that. I thought it was a sweet moment.
There was a time, so yeah, you're talking about, like, there are times you can kind of control, like, the empty space in between Mord and Ben.
Yeah.
So you're guiding, and they're like tethered to it, and you cross this bridge, and just the way I controlled it, like, Mord got caught on the corner of the bridge, and I walked Ben entirely across it, and then Mord like caught up, it like in a glitchy video game way. It was very fun.
Yeah. The same thing happened for me at one point where we were walking around the campsite, and Ben got caught behind the geometry of a tree, and Mord just kept on walking without him. And it felt very Ben in a way. I was like, look at you, dork, walking into a tree.
At some point, Ben also launched into the air. And I was like, oh, Ben.
Not entirely without bugs, but they were not significant in any way. I thought they were cute, actually. So I don't know. Do we have anything else to say about this? I think I had a nice, lovely time with this. I would definitely recommend it for people who want these sorts of narrative, dialogue-driven, film-like experiences in games, and it worked for me. I know you had a little bit of a different relationship with it, Nate.
Yeah, well, I kind of already said it, so I really don't want to detract from the game because I thought it was nice. I just didn't personally connect with much of the emotional side of it, but I thought it was handled really, really well. And I could imagine for some people, this game would be a very emotional experience. For me, it was more like, this was nice. It took me an hour. I definitely recommend it. Just your individual emotional impact will vary, I think, based off of your life experiences, like most art, right? So just this one in particular didn't connect to me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's fair. And anything last to leave us with, Laura? Or
no, I think it's really gentle and it's funny. It's a lot funnier than a lot of these games tend to be.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. I'm going to, print out a picture of Mord and put it in my cubicle for inspiration.
All right.
Nice.
And so I guess we'll leave it there. Listeners, thanks so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game, and we'll see you back here next week.